Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Our panelists are already lined up, so let's convene today's summit. And what an all-stars panel do we have for you today? From Boca Raton, Florida, former Congressman Ron Klein, chairman of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. From Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Jobob, Turning Point USA contributor and host of the Daily Caller Live. And here in our Tel Aviv studios, Dan Perry, international affairs analyst. Hello, gentlemen. Thank you so very much for coming on the show tonight. And our main topic, dancing all his way to jail. But before we discuss what is next for ex-president, presidential hopeful Donald Trump, let's head now live to New York City, where I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim is at. So, Mike, how did we get here?
It started back in 2006 with an alleged affair between the then businessman Donald Trump and Stormy Daniels. Trump denies it to this day, but 10 years later, when Trump was running for president, Daniels started to negotiate a little deal with the National Enquirer to sell her story about the affair. Well, the National Enquirer management there happens to be friends with Trump and their people. They relayed what was going on. In steps Trump attorney and fixer Michael Cohen to negotiate a non-disclosure agreement with Daniels to the tune of $130,000. Now, what's wrong with that? Well, it was falsified as a business expense by Trump's organization. Cohen billed it as a legal retainer. He got his money back and then some for his trouble. The problem is, filing a false business report on your taxes is a crime. Cohen wound up going to jail for 3 years because of it. Tax evasion charges, even a campaign finance violation, because prosecutors said it was done in the service of Trump's presidential campaign to make sure there was no bad publicity. So here we are now, and Trump is on the verge of being indicted for falsifying those business records. It's only a misdemeanor. The big question is it going to be upgraded to a felony, which can only be done if Trump knowingly did it and it was done in the service of covering up a second crime. What's that second crime? We don't know yet. Prosecutors haven't released the indictment, though it's expected any day now.
The one and only I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim. Thank you very much for this. So let's get to it. The quiet before the stormy. What is next for Donald Trump? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each, and pick it up from there. So Ron Klein, please take the lead.
Well, listen, no one is above the law. That's a governing principle in the United States, whether you're the president or anybody else. So I think that whether you're Democrat or Republican or Independent, you should respect that. Republicans have always been the party of law and order, as they describe themselves. They should recognize that Donald Trump, again, if he broke the law, he has to face the consequences.
Okay, Jobob, your thoughts?
To answer the question of what's next for Donald Trump, I have no reason to believe that he's not running for president seriously, and so that's what I think is going to be next for him. As far as how this plays out, it's anyone's guess. I do find it hilarious, though, that this is the thing that people are excited about, quote-unquote, arresting Donald Trump for. I guess we'll talk about that more in a bit.
Yes, we definitely will. Dan Perry, wrap it up for us. Your thoughts?
I think what's next is more of the same. Trump plans to... We can expect Trump, I think, to deploy the same unconventional persona as in the past to his new bid for the presidency. So he will rail against George Soros and fume against fictitious fraud in the previous election and dismiss any charges against him, whether involving Stormy Daniels or January 6th or anything else, as a partisan witch hunt. And the question is whether the target of all this, GOP primary voters, have any appetite left for circus clownish politics.
Okay, and on that note, gentlemen, let's please feel free to interact. And I do want to quote comedian Chris Rock saying that arresting Donald Trump is like arresting Tupac. He's just going to sell more records. Are they stupid? End quote. So are they, Jobob?
Yeah, from a political standpoint, this would be the first time a former U.S. president would be indicted in our entire history as a nation. And look, I agree with probably everybody on this panel that if there is a flaming gun and a very bad crime committed, yeah, it doesn't matter who you are. You should be held accountable under U.S. law. But this is a stretch, and I'm not the only one to say that. The New York Times, not a Trump fan, also said, yeah, this is a stretch in the way they're doing this. They're making a pretty unconventional, and I would dare to say never been tried before, legal stretch. And I'm not an attorney, so I'm just basing my opinions on those that are smarter than I am. For this. And again, if we're going to break a 200-year precedent of not arresting former presidents, I would hope that there's a better crime than paying off hush money to a stripper or a porn star.
Well, I would just respond. Yeah, I would respond to that, Jobob. You may get your wish, because in Atlanta there is a considered indictment coming down for what he did to try to influence the outcome of that election, which is pretty serious, and it's documented. So we'll see what's next. But listen, the reality is, I think it's already been mentioned, that this is Donald Trump. He's a salesman extraordinaire. He's a P.T. Barnum. He will use this, and he already has used this for a fundraising story over the last number of days to do this and to, run his campaign. And this is what he does. So, like you said, whether this is something that the appetite is there, obviously there are other people, but he does have a lock on a lot of people who believe that he is the man who believes in the principles that they believe in, and they're still part of the Republican base that's going to stick with him.
Yeah, the question is whether most of the Republican base is going to stick with him, and recent polls suggest that is indeed the case. I mean, I think it's fair to say that if after two impeachments, the majority of Republicans still want Donald Trump, then I agree with Jobob. They're not going to be impressed by a misdemeanor involving hush money to a porn star. I mean, it's unbecoming and ridiculous, but not something that seems likely to derail the campaign of Trump.
So before we dive in further, okay, yeah, Jobob, please.
No, I was just going to say that if there are more serious crimes out there, and again, I'm just as open-eyed to all of this as anybody. I think him being arrested for this is going to not only set a bad precedent for the country in terms of we've never done this sort of thing before, but also set a bad precedent for anything else coming down the pike. I think if this goes through the way it looks like it will, I think everybody's going to look at something that may be more serious, and I'll admit to that, and roll their eyes, because this, in my opinion, and the opinion of I think a lot of people, is not serious.
Well, but I would just point out that if he is indicted and he refuses to present himself for booking and fingerprinting and is not arrested, that alone would also be a precedent. I mean, no matter what we do here, there's a precedent, because we've never faced this kind of circumstance. There's never been such an ex-president.
And I would also note that the notion of precedent, whether it has to be a serious crime or otherwise, again, the idea of breaking the law, whether you're working in a restaurant or the president of the United States, is something that we need to respect and honor. And, to minimize, we paid a stripper. He did it 2 weeks before the election to try to influence the outcome of the election. There is more to it than this. But also, there are probably a number of other things that are probably going to roll out after this. And is it going to affect the hardcore Republican electorate that still believes in him and supports him? It may not. And that's okay. That's how elections work.
But could this be perhaps testing the waters for a full-blown investigation into all the other Trump's dealings?
I think all the rest of the things are running on their own. You've got an independent Georgia authority that is looking at the election tampering that went on there, if it happened. You've got a couple other things going on. No, I think they're all independent.
Yeah, I agree. I think what is really being tested here is whether people in the middle of the American body politic are still prepared to have this kind of a president. So the unprecedented indictment, should it come, on a manner as strange as a Stormy Daniels case, will bite into that maybe, but I would agree that the indictments may be coming down the pike, whether it involves the Georgia business or January 6th, would be more serious. And we would really see whether it's just a matter of a majority of the Republican Party, which is maybe a third of the American electorate, or the additional push of maybe up to 40% of Americans who just hate the Democrats so much they can't, or the progressives, that they can't conceive of not supporting Trump. Or will it really remain the case that after January 6th and under these crazy circumstances, about half the voters are going to support this kind of candidate? It's fascinating, and I'm not sure the answer is yes, and polls suggest that it is no.
Well, to go back to the earlier Chris Rock comment, this is only going to embolden him. I think it is. And I think that ties into whether or not this is a serious crime. Alvin Bragg, who's the DA in Manhattan, ran on and is very proud of the fact that I'm going to be the one that gets Trump. Obviously, he's the DA of Manhattan. He has higher political aspirations and wants to be the person that delivers the snapshot of Donald Trump walking in to be arrested. So that being said, what he's being committed of is effectively campaign finance violation, which I've been a political consultant for a very long time. I have committed campaign violations on accident. So has literally every single person who's ever run a campaign at a bigger scale. Barack Obama committed campaign finance infractions. The commonplace is a fine, but because this DA has been outwardly spoken about, I'm going to be the one that gets Donald Trump. That's what I think is going to be the big problem here. And a bunch of people are going to roll their eyes if this takes place. Yes, the law is the law and people should be held accountable, but hold them accountable with a fine, as is the case with pretty much everything else, especially if you're going to be that outward about, I'm going to get this guy.
So Ron Klein, not all crimes born equal?
I listen. That's true, and is this less significant than what happened on January 6th? I personally, as a former member of Congress, when I saw what happened on January 6th, people, besieging the Capitol, that was one of the most significant things in our history. And if he can be proven that he had something behind that, I think many Americans would be concerned. Now, is there a part of the Republican Party that still will stand behind him? Probably. And, listen, the more people that run on the Republican side, the more they're going to divide up the electorate. And Donald Trump only had 30% last time on the Republican primary front, and he was able to win. He's very good at what he does in terms of communications and that side of it. I personally don't want him to be the president again, for sure. But there's a part of the Republicans that are stuck with him. And by the way, even if he doesn't win some of these primaries, he's not going to go quietly.
Yeah.
But don't you think that if he were to be arrested on this case, don't you think that it would make it a little bit more justifiable? And again, I'm just looking at this from a political standpoint, where people would be upset the next time if let's just say hypothetically, if something is more serious. I think this is going to diminish any chance that anybody else has, even though these cases are running on their own, like you said. It's going to embolden the base more to roll their eyes to the next thing that comes up. And again, this is all, in my opinion, being pushed by the political aspirations of a pretty out there DA.
The base is going to roll their eyes at almost anything, realistically, and Trump will portray almost anything as a witch hunt. I agree that the cartoonish aspect of this particular case may mean that it ultimately doesn't move the needle. But the cases coming down the pike, as we say, especially involving January 6th, very well might, not necessarily with the Republican base, but with voters in the center whom Trump needs in order to stand any chance in November 24.
Yeah, Congressman Klein, wrap it up for us as we're nearing the end of the first part of our discussion.
Yeah, I think we're all sort of agreeing on the fact that this the most serious case out of maybe the two more that may be coming? Probably not. But I think they stand alone, and I think that they will have their own damage, but I think the Republican base probably stands.
Well, the question being, perhaps this is what Jobob was alluding to, whether it will turn out to be the court who cried wolf, so to speak. But let's all think about it, because we're taking a few minutes break. But we'll be right back with part two of the summit. We have so much more to discuss, so do not go anywhere. Welcome back. Still with us here on the summit, Jobob, Ron Klein, and Dan Perry. Thank you, gentlemen, for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we get back to our conversation, Trump not keeping it vague this time around, but rather calls for action. So let's take a listen to what the White House is saying.
The president has been very clear when it comes to Americans who want to protest. They should do it peacefully, and that is something that is incredibly important that the president has always continued to say. We are always prepared. I can say that from here. I'm just not going to get into hypotheticals or any potential scenarios, but we are always prepared.
So let's get to it. Should Biden be worried about the Donald Trump protesting army, so to speak? Another quick fire round and we pick it up from there. Jobob, take the lead, please.
I'm not sure I like the phrasing of that, the protesting army. I will say, I try very, very hard intentionally to not conflate the terms protester and rioter. Of course, nobody hopes that there's any riots. Nobody wants any political violence of any kind. It's abhorrent on both sides when both sides commit it. But in terms of protests, I think the Biden administration has a lot to be worried about politically when they look at all of the things going on with his own family and now what's going on with Trump.
Yes, and I agree with the poor phrasing on our end. So thank you for that, Jobob. Dan Perry, your thoughts?
Well, of course, Biden should be concerned about mayhem and bloodshed and damage on the streets, but from the perspective of political utility purely, Biden can probably only benefit from Trumpian outrages. So since I'm assuming that Biden would rather run against Trump than DeSantis, I think his bigger worry may actually be from craziness that might damage Trump so bad that he's sidelined in favor of a more competent candidate.
Interesting. Ron Klein, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that everyone has eyes wide open this time about what happened on January 6th and whether Capitol Police were prepared. Obviously, this could manifest itself in lots of places around the country if there was some type of organized effort. I don't know if there is. But I think our law enforcement, I know in New York, they've already talked about being prepared for it. I think law enforcement does need to anticipate and be prepared, but I don't necessarily suspect that Donald Trump's call for protest is going to end up in bloodshed, but certainly I think it would be a big mistake if it went that direction.
Yeah, and let's feel free to interact, of course, from this point onwards. And circling back to the comments made by Dan Perry here, are Democrats even in the race, gentlemen?
Do you mean might they win the election, or are there people challenging Biden?
Is anyone holding any campaign? Are we seeing any pushback there?
I think there's Mr. Klein may dispute this, but I think that the Democrats, many of them, are currently happy to let the Republicans tear each other to pieces and look like a bunch of clowns, while Biden does his best to speak as little as possible for fear of gaffes or whatnot, and project competence, which, talking points from the RNC aside, he is doing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, when you have a sitting president, Democrat or Republican, and they're the ones who are going to potentially be running again, and he certainly hasn't sent any messages that he's not, it sort of freezes the rest of the potential candidates for running. So right now, Biden is the candidate. It's not saying it formally, but certainly leaving that impression, and he wants to finish the job kind of thing, and that's the language. But, again, I think it is about speaking competence, showing what they worked on over the last couple of years, demonstrating how it's affecting communities, and letting the Republicans fight it out.
Yeah, just a tiny bit of finesse here, Tov. Okay, let's take a listen to the man of the hour, Donald Trump, posting this on his social media platform, Truth Social. Earlier, let's take a listen.
These 4 horrible, radical left Democrat investigations of your all-time favorite president, me, is just a continuation of the most disgusting witch hunt in the history of our country. Whether it's the Mar-a-Lago raid or the Unselect Committee hoax, the perfect Georgia phone call, it was absolutely perfect, or the Stormy Horseface Daniels extortion plot, they're all sick. And it's fake news.
Well, way back when, we all remember the infamous Fifth Avenue catchphrase from Trump. We are wiser now. Is there any controversy that could come out to turn Trump supporters against him, or at this point, is he immune to scandal to an extent, Jobob?
I think a lot of people, especially on the conservative side of the aisle, know what Trump is. None of the stuff that has come out with his past Playboy lifestyle has been surprising to anybody. And so, I think, again, from politically speaking, the fact that he's able to kind of combine all of this sort of stuff up, whether or not different things are more serious or not serious at all, is going to be a problem with people who want to see him get taken out. Now, obviously, there's the point that it's a a huge possibility that Democrats want to see Trump run because they think he's beatable. I'm not entirely sure of that, because I think the American people are also watching what's going on the Biden family end of things, and are not liking any of that. And so, this is going to be a toss-up, in my opinion. But I think there's going to be a lot of resiliency from the Trump people, his supporters, because some of this is getting so ridiculous.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't see an American majority emerging in favor of the level of sordidness and chicanery that we see from Trump. What I do see potentially happening is the Democrats losing it. If it turns out that Biden appears incapable of carrying out his duties, if inflation isn't tamed, if the Republicans manage to present a narrative that somehow Trump aside seizes the imagination while the Democrats are seen to flail, maybe unfairly, because a lot of their troubles they inherited from Trump, I could see the Democrats losing. So I tend to agree with the earlier question. A lot does depend on what the Democrats ultimately do.
But since Joe Bob mentioned the legal affairs on the Biden side of things, Ron Klein, and I'm paraphrasing here, obviously, is the legal system an extension for political means? Is it being abused for political means?
Well, listen, there's extremes of everything, and I don't think that the legal system, the political system, may be abusing it. It's been done before by both sides, for sure. I think this drumming up of stuff about Hunter Biden or whatever they're trying to say is really just that. It's just a lot of noise. I mean, they'll obviously try to build it up as much as they can. But that being said, the Donald Trump stuff is so much more serious. So when you get into a general election campaign, it's obviously a binary choice. It's one candidate against another. It's not like I don't like either one of these guys, and I've got a third choice. So someone's going to have to make a decision on which of the two candidates. So the Republicans have to figure out whether their best candidate is going to be anybody. And by the way, DeSantis, who I know from Florida, he's playing it extremely far right, which may be attractive for now, but that may be a little bit off-putting to a lot of Americans, which we're pretty much a center-right country, not a way out right or way out left country.
Yeah, well, you got to get through the primary, so it's understandable why DeSantis would be playing it that way. But in terms of whether or not Democrats are going to run with Joe Biden, I think that's the biggest question: whether or not they're going to consolidate around him or go to a different candidate. Joe Biden is running against a lot of really weird allegations in the Hunter Biden stuff, but also against Father Time. And I think we're going to start seeing a lot of Democrats come out and say, "Yeah, I don't know if we're going to support." We've already seen several people sitting in office say that sort of thing. And so I can't help but all agree here. I feel like the Democrats, is kind of in their court whether or not they want to run with an old man or find a different alternative. But again, that's not discounting the fact that there's a lot of angry, more conservative center right people out there that could feasibly go for either Trump or DeSantis.
I have to say, it also says a lot about the state of politics in America, that at the end of the day, Biden, with his difficulties, and Trump, with his ridiculousness, are the two candidates that we end up getting again. And this has a lot to do with politics around the world also.
Well, it's not for nothing that you're our All-Stars panelist, because even when you're all in agreement, it's still fascinating to listen to you all. So thank you very much, former Congressman Ron Klein, Jobob, and Dan Perry. Thank you for your time and insight.